Welcome to the International Lawyers Network's webinar series. The ILN is an association of 91 high-quality, full-service, and specialized law firms with over 5,000 lawyers worldwide, of which your firm is a valued member. The network provides clients with easily accessible legal services in 67 countries on 6 continents. Today's webinar, Harnessing the Full Potential of a Professional Network, will provide practical tools and techniques that will allow you to track and capture more of the business opportunities in your network. Before I pass things over to our speaker, some housekeeping notes. Everyone will remain muted throughout the session, so if you have any questions for David, please type them into the chat box on your screen, and I'll share those with him during or after the program. We are recording the presentation, so a copy of the recording along with David's slides will be sent to you following the webinar. Our speaker today and throughout the series is David Ackert. David is the president of the Ackert Advisory and mentor to high-achieving professionals in the legal profession. He has developed and implemented business development programs for countless firms, from AmLaw 100s to local boutiques. Widely recognized as an e-learning pioneer in the legal field, David is the founder of Practice Boomers, a business development e-learning program and 2-time winner of the Legal Marketing Association's Your Honor Award. He is also the founder of Practice Pipeline, a pipeline management software platform that incorporates business development coaching. The combination of technology and coaching has become a hallmark of his programs. So without further ado, I will pass it over to David.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hello, everyone. Great to be back here for another ILN program. Today, we're going to talk about harnessing the full potential of your professional network. And to launch that idea, I want to submit to you that we all have extensive networks. I would argue that for most of us in today's social media environment, our networks are perhaps too expansive. We have 500 plus LinkedIn connections. We have Facebook friends we've never met and probably never will. We have 1,000 cards in our Rolodex or our Outlook V cards. And ultimately, that network is not what is most useful when it comes to harnessing the full potential, because that broad base of relationships, most of which are pretty tenuous, are not ultimately going to be the sources of business that we will be relying on for the results that we are receiving and the results we hope to receive. Ultimately, it comes down to a short list of just a few people who are meaningful clients who engage and re-engage us, prospects who will be engaging us in the future, and referral sources who send us referrals and hopefully will continue to do so. These are the people who have the highest likelihood of connecting us to our business development goals. And so it's important to concentrate on that short list, not only because that is where we're likely to have the highest result and the best result, but also we just are too busy to manage a network that is much broader than a dozen or 2 dozen people. Now, we try to manage these networks with our e-newsletters and our social media posts in an attempt to sort of touch base with a whole bunch of people, because I suppose you never know where the business will come from. But the fact of the matter is that we need to prioritize that short list of relationships if we are truly to harness the full potential of our network. Now, as you are putting together your short list, and part of my agenda today is to encourage you to have a short list and to organize it, to meaningfully track the business that you are getting from it, or at least track the activities that you are focusing on your short list. Think a little bit about the influence factor of these people. Now, when I say influence, I mean their influence over your next matter. So that might be that they are the buyer of your legal services, in which case they have a high degree of influence. They might be influencers in that they can sway the person who ultimately makes the decision, but that they are not themselves the decision maker. Perhaps they would have a 4 or a 3 on a scale of 1 to 5. But you want to focus your short list of people who at least are at a 3 or higher. And a 3 is where you would put yourself in terms of your ability to influence. So you can certainly develop relationships, you can help to encourage momentum, but you're not ultimately the decision maker. The decision maker would probably be where you would categorize as 5, and then there are people who are intermediaries or who can have some sway in the process. You would put them at a 4. If you have anybody on your short list who is a 2 or a 1, simply because you really like them or you've known them forever or what have you, I would encourage you not to put them on your short list. They can still be your friend, but they don't belong on a short list of business development contacts who can really meaningfully make a difference for you. And again, the exercise here is to take our vast network and to prioritize that short list of people who we want to place most of our emphasis and energy on. So if that's you, make sure that everyone on your short list is at least a 3 or higher. So most lawyers don't really keep track of a short list. They use their memory, which is not a great tool, I would argue, for tracking the people who can help them from a business development context. They tend to be somewhat reactive. That is to say, whoever emailed them most recently ends up being the person that they have coffee or lunch with to explore a business development opportunity. Even if they actually thought about it, there are a good dozen other people who would be a better use of that 1 hour of time. But instead, there is just sort of this top-of-mind reactive quality to the way that most people try to harness their relationships and the business potential therein. We developed software called Practice Pipeline at my company that is designed to help people with their short list. And I think it's interesting just to look at the fields that we ultimately found to be most important to our user base. So what they wanted was a way to categorize, is this person a client, a prospect, or a referral source? Because those are the 3 relationship categories from which lawyers get their business. Now, a referral source could be internal, that is to say, another partner at your firm, or it could be external, that is to say, a CPA or some other advisor who's referring work to you. And then they wanted to know the company, they wanted to know the name of the contact, obviously that was important for them to track, and then they wanted to know some sort of goal. You know, what is ultimately the objective here? What are we trying to accomplish? And is that low, medium, or high value? Because I want to be able to categorize my relationships and my opportunities based on high value. If I really just don't have a lot of time right now, I don't even want to look at my entire short list. I just want to look at the high value relationships within my short list. And then they wanted to know, what are they going to do? What's my next step? Am I scheduling lunch? Am I putting together a round of golf? Am I just sending them an article and the deadline for that? But this ultimately was a fairly minimal list of fields that our user base responded to in the tracking software that we designed for them. And I thought that's interesting because, it's not a lot of information. You ultimately, you know where to find their email or their phone number and their address. And while you could certainly create a spreadsheet with a whole number of columns on, what was the value of the last deal they brought in and run that kind of business analysis, that's ultimately not something that most lawyers are really interested in investing a lot of time in. They just want to know, who is it, how important are they, and what's the next thing that I need to do to forward this relationship and by when. So I think as you are looking to create some sort of tracking system, certainly you can use software. There's a lot of software out there to help you with that. But you want to, at the very least, track some of these key characteristics so that you can stay on top of the people that you've deemed to be most influential in helping you get more work. So the first thing is you start creating this short list. Now, I would recommend not using, say, a legal pad and having that ultimately be your short list. Even a spreadsheet is fine, but it's not particularly intrusive. That is to say, it's easy to ignore it. So you can create the spreadsheet and just let it sit on your desktop and never click on it. It's not doing you a lot of good. So the good thing about apps or interactive software that send you push notifications is that they will remind you and keep this top of mind for you. And as you're figuring out who you want to put into this short list, think about the key clients who either will be able to engage you for more work in the future, people with whom you could expand the client relationship, cross-sell more work into, especially if their companies are growing or if they're in spaces that are highly regulated. Those prospects, people who you've known for a while and who have either directly or indirectly expressed an interest in working with you but have not yet engaged you. Prospects, by the way, could also be people who engaged you once upon a time, but that engagement has sort of fallen away for the last 5 or however many years, and you're really trying to re-engage them as a client. So they've had some experience of you, but you would be hard-pressed to call them an existing client at this juncture. And then, of course, referral sources, as defined earlier. These could be non-competing lawyers. They could be competing lawyers who tend to send you conflict work. They could be other advisors, CPAs, consultants, finance, et cetera. And to begin with, you want to track at least 12 relationships. Now, that might seem like a lot or a little depending on how much networking you have and how expansive your network is. But remember, this is your short list. This is not 100 people. This is not 50 people. It's just too hard to manage that many people. If you have 50 people on your short list and your best practice is to try to have some sort of meaningful interaction with each of them at least once a quarter so that you can stay top of mind and capture opportunities, you're going to find that with a list of 50, that's a lot of lunches. That's a lot of outbound calling and a lot of maintenance and organization. And it's probably excessive unless you're in a consumer law space. Now, for those of you who are practicing any kind of consumer law, you definitely need a very long short list because basically anybody with a pulse and a checkbook could be a potential client of yours. But I'm going to assume that most of the ILN network here is focusing primarily on corporate side work. And so you can have a shorter list of relationships, people who are decision makers, GCs, people who are in legal departments or business owners who can send you work, engage your firm, and again, the referral sources. And then always assign an action item and a deadline to keep yourself proactive with each contact. It's not helpful just to have a tickler list. Here are 12 names, people who I think really belong on my short list. If I can just stay on top of these people, then I'm harnessing the potential of my existing network, or at least I'm focusing on the highest and best opportunities. The problem with that is that it forces you to look at a name and every time have to come up with, what am I going to do to move this relationship forward? And we kind of get uncreative if we don't think through this in advance. We see the name and say, I'll just send them an email. Hey, was just thinking about you, how are things going? Or, hey, we should grab lunch again and see how things are going. And, at some point, it becomes a pretty redundant exercise. If you can think about these 12 people in the context of, what am I ultimately trying to accomplish? I mean, if it's a client and I'm looking to cross-sell some work to them, I should probably, my next action item shouldn't be to send them an email to check in. It should be to do a little bit of research to see what's been going on in their company over the last few months. And is there anything that I can either congratulate them on or call and warn them about, or tell them, hey, listen, this latest development really warrants a more in-depth conversation about some of the implications downstream. So let's sit down and have that as our agenda when we have lunch. But this creates a more trusted advisor kind of a position that you take when you're reaching out to your key relationships. If your intention with a referral source is, I really want to get 2 referrals this year, significant referrals from this referral source. Well, that means that you're probably not just going to reach out and have lunch with them again and just catch up. How are the kids? How's business? Great, well, just keep me in mind. Instead, you're probably going to have a more meaningful conversation about, hey, listen, I've sent you some referrals over the last 12 months. I want to make sure that, I've been sending you the right kind of work. And also, I want to make sure that we continue to have a meaningful back and forth on this. Here are some new data points that I can share with you in terms of the kinds of matters that I've been working on at my firm so that you can look out for those appropriate opportunities, the subtext being, hey, you really may want to step up your game a little bit in terms of sending me referrals. Now, you don't want to overtly say that, but you can certainly imply it. Or you could even have a more involved conversation with them about the kinds of introductions you would like them to send your way. They may not necessarily be clients. They may be other referral sources. But either way, you want to get 2 meaningful referrals out of this person. Otherwise, this starts to feel a lot like a one-way street. We all have those relationships, those referral sources that we send business to over and over again. We never see much coming back, and at some point, it just starts to become a bit of a sticking point. So the action item is a useful exercise so that your outreach is ultimately aligned to your objective with that person. And of course, putting a deadline on that ensures that you don't just sort of indefinitely procrastinate, which can often happen when a lawyer is running a busy practice. And then finally, as I said earlier, using some sort of software or some sort of app that interjects into your busy day and reminds you to follow up can be an important practice as well. Now, let's talk a little bit about referral sources because I think this is one of those areas where a lot of lawyers rely on their referral sources to give them business, but they don't necessarily have productive referral sources. And the process of securing a useful referral source can be rather inefficient, right? You meet someone at a mixer or you're introduced to someone through your network. You sit down as a courtesy to get to know them. The conversation goes pretty well, so great, let's keep each other in mind. And then you do or you don't. Maybe they send you something, maybe you send them something, but it just kind of unravels from there into a little bit of a messy exercise. And hopefully, if you're lucky, you end up with one or two consistent referral sources who really understand what you do and send you business, meaningful business, repeatedly. But finding those people is a little like finding a needle in a haystack. It's a lot like dating, right? You go through a lot of first dates before you find a relationship that has some real longevity to it. So in order to make this process a little more efficient for you, I want to encourage you to use the 4 C's to qualify your referral sources, because the referral sources are difficult to qualify. You can qualify a client pretty easily. How much revenue is this client giving to the firm? How big is their company? How many areas are we currently servicing? Are there other areas that we could be servicing? That analysis doesn't take very long. And with prospects too, how big is this company? What kind of legal needs do we anticipate? What's the legal need that we've been talking to them about? Are they a viable prospect or not? Easy to get to the yes or the no on those first 2 categories, but the referral source is a little bit more difficult. So the 4 C's that you would use to qualify a referral source are chemistry, commerce, competence, and collaboration. And if your referral source meets all 4 of those characteristics, then they have earned a spot on your short list. Let's go through each of these for a few moments. So chemistry, let's say you go to a function. It could be a bar association meeting. It could be a networking meeting. It could be an industry conference. But regardless, you're introduced or you find your way to an initial conversation with someone who you suspect could be a good referral source. So within a minute or so, you've assessed whether there's any real chemistry here. But chemistry is important. It's important because you can't sustain a relationship with someone you don't like. By the second or third time it's time to have lunch with them, you're going to come up with some excuse because you just don't feel like interacting with them. So having someone whose company you truly enjoy, somebody who you look forward to seeing on a personal level is an important component of identifying a meaningful referral source. And Lindsay will probably back me up on this. ILN is constantly providing opportunities for its members to socialize with one another so that you can develop that rapport and establish that chemistry. That is, after all, the most important and first qualifier as to whether or not any business will really be exchanging hands down the road. Then we move into commerce. So chemistry, you're already assessing your instincts or giving you a pretty clear roadmap on that. But commerce is a little more challenging. Now, we tend to try to assess commerce potential when we ask, well, what do you do? But, a lot of times we answer the question with a vagary like, I'm a litigator, or, oh, I'm a lawyer, or maybe I'm a real estate lawyer. But that doesn't really answer the question thoroughly, what you do. And I would encourage, whenever you are asked that question, to provide triggers in your elevator speech. So the elevator speech is that 30-second or 15-second or whatever it is response that you give when you're asked, what do you do, the language that you use to introduce yourself. And rather than just recite what it says on your business card, I would encourage you to include some triggers. So what I'm talking about when I say triggers answer the question, what it is that you're looking for. What are you looking for? And the way to do that is you might say, well, I'm an M&A lawyer with such and such law firm. I tend to help clients who are, and then you fill in the blank based on your practice area, based on your client, your prospective client profile. But it might be something like, my typical client is a company who's developing a new product or experiencing rapid growth. My typical client is someone who's in the process of selling a company or plans to sell a company within the next few years. My typical client is someone who's working in a highly regulated space, such as X or Y. my typical client is someone who's doing cross-border work because I tend to focus a lot on international tax, whatever the answer to this question is. But make sure that you include it when you tell them what you do. So you not only want to answer the question, what do, you want to include who you do it for in terms of your typical client. Because what that does is it begins the dialogue in the direction of, oh, actually, I know some people who are doing some cross-border work. Let me see if these would be good connections for you. Or, funny you should mention that. I was just having coffee with a CEO friend of mine last week, and she was talking about how she's thinking about her exit, selling her company sometime in the next 2 years. So these are the kinds of entrees that will lead to a meaningful connection. Just telling them you're an M&A lawyer or a tax lawyer, whatever kind of lawyer you are, doesn't necessarily lead them to say, ah, well, then maybe there's something that I could do for you here. So help them understand the context of a connection. Don't just assume that they know it or that it's even going to occur to them if they do know it. So that's part of how we assess the commerce potential when we are talking to referral sources. So then we move to the third C, which is competence. Now, the reason that it's really critical that your referral sources are competent in your estimation is that at some point you're going to be referring work to them. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a one-way street where you're just getting work from them, and that's probably not going to be very sustainable in the long haul. At some point, they're going to be tired of the fact that they've sent you 2, 3, 4 referrals and you haven't sent them anything back. So it's important as you're entering these relationships to have a fairly good sense of their competence so that you don't have any reservation when it comes to sending work to them. Now, it's difficult to assess another service professional's competence unless you engage them for their service, right? I mean, if this were another lawyer and you engage them, then you could actually speak to their competence. If this were a CPA or a consultant or someone like that and you'd engage them, you could speak to it rather than just take their word for it, because their website says that they're great, they've got all these endorsements on LinkedIn, and they certainly sound articulate and knowledgeable when you sit down with them, but that doesn't guarantee that they are truly competent. And the last thing you want is to get that phone call from the client who you referred to them saying, wow, this person really did not represent you very well. Their fees were unreasonable. They were late to the meeting. The solution they proposed was not even all that relevant. They didn't seem all that knowledgeable, whatever it is that they would say to you. So rather than put yourself in a position where you might get that call after having referred a client or a relationship to a poorly vetted referral source, I would suggest that the first time you sit down with them, ask about their background, certainly to get a sense of their competence, but more importantly than that, ask for their advice. Oh, you're a CPA? I have a question for you. I have a client who's been dealing with this issue around their international tax challenge. How would you advise them to proceed? Or, oh, you're a financial advisor. What is your opinion of where the marketplace is going? I personally have some investments in this or that sector. Do you think that these are wise investments or not? So you're actually asking them for real-time advice, either for yourself or for a client, or frankly, it could even be a hypothetical client. It could be a scenario that's 2 years old already. It doesn't matter. What you're looking for is to get a real-time experience of them as an advisor. And if that experience occurs to you as being competent, then congratulations, you have a pretty good indicator of whether or not they're going to sound that way in front of the client you introduce them to. But if they can't answer a few questions that give you a sense of their competence as an advisor in real time, then I would recommend that you consider it will probably be that way should you refer somebody to them as well. And then the final one here is collaboration. And you can assess somebody's collaboration, their collaborative mindset, pretty quickly, but you have to think through how to do that. You know, a lot of people, they learn the hard way that the referral source who certainly they had some chemistry with, there was some commerce potential, and they deemed it to be competent, turned out not to be particularly collaborative in nature. In other words, you sent them several referrals, they never sent anything back. So it's important that you can assess that early on, because these referrals that you send out, they have value. They're like chits, right? They have a certain cachet to them, and you don't want to waste them on relationships who aren't going to appreciate that you're in a symbiotic relationship, a symbiotic business relationship as a referral source. So what I usually recommend is give them something of value right after you meet them. Now, that doesn't have to be a client. In fact, it shouldn't be. You just met this person. But it could be an introduction to another colleague who could ultimately become an additional referral source for them. It could be an article that you wrote that you think would be relevant to them. It could even be picking up something that you heard them talk about as you were getting to know them. Could be a recommendation to a restaurant or some sort of resource that you are privy to. In any event, you're giving them something of value. You are demonstrating, hey, this is how this relationship is going to go. We're going to give each other things that are valuable. And then just notice if they acknowledge your gesture. Does it take them 3 weeks to say thank you? Oh, gosh, I got really busy, but thanks for that, recommendation. That would not bode well, because how they do this is how they'll do just about anything, right? I mean, when you send them a client, what's to say that they're not going to sit on that for 3 weeks? Did they thank you? Did they try to send something of value in return? And did their response satisfy your expectations of a referral source on your short list? That's ultimately the question. But again, you want to sort of test them out. Just as you're testing them out on their competence, you're testing them out on their collaboration using a real-time experience to not only set the right tone in the relationship, but also to get a sense of how this person relates when it comes to a referral source, a symbiotic, a collaborative relationship. So assuming that you get through all four, then congratulations, this person has earned their way onto your short list, and now over time, you should be able to realize some meaningful business potential from them. The good news is that this whole process only takes about a meeting and a half, right? So when you met them at the industry event or the ILN meeting or wherever it was, you established chemistry and commerce in one conversation. You shook their hand, you said, what do you do? You asked them about the kinds of clients that they work with. You gave them a sense of the kinds of client issues that you help to resolve. So that only took about 10 minutes or maybe, whatever, the dinner that was set up for you to get to know each other. Then you have a follow-on conversation where you assess their competence. Maybe you could even roll that into the dinner and ask for their advice over the dinner table. The collaboration occurs in the follow-up when you get back to your office and you fire off a quick email to send them something of value. So this doesn't have to take 5 years. A lot of people, they look at their list of referral source relationships, and these are people they've known for years and years, and there's been a lot of kissing of frogs and a lot of first dates to get to that stage, a lot of wasted energy. I think if you have a system like this in place, you can identify somebody who has meaningful potential as a referral source pretty early on, and then your follow-through in that relationship is a much wiser investment. It's less trial by error. So let's talk about staying on track. So you know who the clients are that you want to put on your short list, the people where you want to expand those relationships. You know who the prospects are, people who you've been in dialogue with, or people with whom you've had relationships for many years, maybe people you went to law school with, people who are now running companies, who are running legal divisions within companies. And we just talked about the 4 C's that define a referral source. But consider this. There's a recent GC survey that was run by BTI that talks about how the GCs say it requires up to 14 touch points before a target will respond to a soliciting solicitor. What that means is that GCs, people who are in the role of buying legal services, generally will require up to 14 meaningful interactions with a lawyer before they will engage them for the first matter. So, sending the client alert or the e-newsletter doesn't count as a meaningful touch point. These are generally conversations. So you met them at an event, or you were introduced to them, or they were referred to you. You had an initial conversation. Maybe then they asked for a proposal. You sent them the proposal. Then you followed up and talked about the proposal. You walked them through it. Then they decided, oh, we're going to go in a different direction. Then 2 years later, there was another conversation, and now there's another matter they want to talk to you about. So these are all meaningful touch points because they are interactions. By the way, social time also counts as a meaningful touch point. They get to know you, you establish chemistry with them, they decide they really like you, they want to work with you. So these are the kinds of touch points that will ultimately forge the sort of bond that turns into a meaningful client down the road. But the outside counsel surveys reveal that 90% of lawyers quit after the first unsuccessful attempt to contact a prospect. So let's say you meet somebody who's a potential client, or you have a long-standing relationship with someone who could purchase your services. You reach out to them, you say, hey, we should grab lunch. Would love to talk to you about what we're doing here at the law firm. Maybe we could find a way to work together. And they don't respond to that invitation. 90% of lawyers will assume that that means, oh, they don't want to talk to me, and they will stop reaching out. When in fact, they're probably just busy, or they probably just didn't get the email, or who knows what. But rather than assuming that that one attempt was an indication of your chances of working with them, the survey suggests that you would want to be a lot more persistent than that. But in order for that to happen, you need to shift your mindset. You can't think of your prospect as a stepping stone to your next engagement. In other words, I'm going to interact with you this one time. I'm very busy. I'm trying to make this as efficient as possible. And if you don't respond to that one overture, then I'm going to assume that there's nothing here. And I'm just going to move on to the next one. But rather, these relationships represent a series of opportunities to be of service and deepen a client-side relationship. You are essentially demonstrating, even before the engagement, the kind of lawyer you are. You are not a one and done. You're somebody who's going to be thorough. You're going to be thoughtful. You're going to be persistent. You're going to stay focused on your objective. So you're really looking to build something here rather than have a one-off relationship transaction. Also consider from their perspective, they may be in a scenario where there's less urgency for them to resolve the matter on their side. They're looking at potentially a new strategy, perhaps maybe even an internal hire that would make the need to engage your services less relevant. There may be some new politics at the organization such that they can't hire you anymore, either because of fee reasons or because there's some other relationship that's been brought in with a change in leadership. There could be budget cuts, which are forcing them to go in another direction, or they could just be procrastinating because they have other higher priority items to focus on. These are all things that you are not privy to. These are details that typically you are not privy to. And so unless you get into a meaningful dialogue with the prospective client, it's a bit of a leap to assume that they just don't want to talk to you if you reached out to them with some intention to pitch. And of course, clients often don't communicate, or at least they don't volunteer the details around their reservations, and law firms typically don't have a thorough dialogue to identify them. And so we end up with this scenario. Lawyers waiting by the phone. When are they going to call? They said they would call. They said they were interested. Or, you know, I sent the email. When are they going to email me back? And you end up playing this waiting game. But these assumptions that I alluded to earlier tend to be a bit of a trap for the lawyer. You know, the lawyer will assume they're just busy, but I'm top of mind for them. Or they'll call me when they're ready to engage me. Or I will seem desperate if I contact them. I will become a nuisance if I contact them more than once. Or I'm just too busy to follow up now, but I will later when I have time. These are all assumptions. You don't know that any of these are true, but you're going to assume that because it's easier than reaching out repeatedly, being persistent, and giving them up to 12 opportunities to reject you. So again, these are the kinds of follow-on strategies that are important to consider for the people on your shortlist, because they're the people who have the most potential to bring you business. And even when some of them are long-standing relationships, they might go underwater. They might become less responsive during times when they're either not sure how to proceed or they're just dealing with higher priority items than whether or not they're going to engage you for a new matter. So consider an effective follow-up strategy replaces these assumptions in the assumption trap with action and grants you more influence over the outcome. We've been talking about influence here. So if the prospect is not responding to you, it is likely that they're focused on higher priority matters. Sending them reminders that they have not gotten back to you is intrusive and does not add value to them. So if you say, hey, let's go out to lunch, and then you send them another email that says, hey, I'm not sure if you saw my email, but I asked you if let's go out to lunch. Or if you sent them a proposal, and then you're like, hey, have you looked at the proposal? And then another email that says, hey, I haven't heard back. I'm just, you know, a friendly check-in about that proposal. This isn't adding any value. These communications don't do anything other than just gently pester them. So the best way to follow up is by providing value. Even if it is intrusive, they will appreciate the value. So it's not just an intrusion that has no value. It's an intrusion that does have value. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're sitting down with your family over dinner, and you're about to dig in, and your cell phone goes off, and you know better, but you glance at it, and it's actually from an area code where you have several clients. So just to be sure, because some of these clients are dealing with some pretty sensitive and urgent matters, you excuse yourself for a moment, you step away from the dinner table, and you answer the phone with maybe just a little bit of irritation in your voice because they just pulled you away from your family. But it turns out it's a prospective client who was referred to you by an existing client who has an urgent legal matter. It's a significant matter. It's likely to keep your firm busy for the next year, and all of a sudden there's no one you'd rather be talking to. So you'll take the extra 15 minutes or whatever it is to set some expectations and assure them that you'll continue the conversation first thing tomorrow morning. Value justifies intrusion. If the value is significant, it will justify an intrusion into someone's life. So rather than think to yourself, oh, I don't want to send them yet another note about having lunch, or yet another note about that proposal, or yet another reminder that, you know, our law firm is here and we'd love to work with you sometime, or, you know, we'd love to introduce you to that partner in the tax department because you aren't working with us in that regard, in that capacity. Consider value adds as a way of reaching out to the client. Consider that your communication should have a value add to it, so that you're not even talking to them about the proposal. They know that you sent them a proposal. They don't need to be reminded of it. Instead, you're offering them training, especially on-site CLE. That has value. Or you're sending them an invitation to a social or an industry event. You're offering to have them speak or be published or maybe co-published with you for a publication that you have your eye on. Or perhaps you're providing an introduction for a strategic business contact for them. Perhaps you are providing a relevant resource, a case study, a checklist, a best practice article, or a white paper of some sort that your firm has made available, or even if it's just a note of congratulations, that has some value. You just don't want to do a bait and switch here, okay? Don't say, oh, I was thinking of you, and we've got this CLE, and so I thought I would offer it to you and your department free of charge. Oh, and by the way, what about that proposal? You definitely don't want to do that. What you want to do is just take the proposal off the table and start offering value. Again, you want to demonstrate to them that this is the kind of lawyer I am, this is the kind of law firm that you're thinking about doing business with. We're looking out for our clients, we're providing value constantly, and our follow-ups are always going to be welcome and valuable to you. So this is from Thomson Reuters 2017 Business Development Benchmarking Survey. It looks at the most effective business development activities of a group of law firms in the top category. I forget if it's AmLaw 200 or which it is, but they do these flash surveys, and then they look at their peer monitor data as well to put together this information, and it's really interesting. So if you look at the top 3 most effective business development activities as reported by the law firm, number 1 is existing client visits, going to a site, your client site, and visiting them, putting in that face time, interacting with them. And number 2 is prospective client visits, so going and offering CLE, for instance, on site for the client or for the prospective client. And then number 3 is client education, again, CLE. So there's a lot here about face time and providing education. I find that most clients aren't really interested in CLE, in a site visit unless it includes some CLE. I mean, they're already plenty busy, so having you show up and just sort of walk around and take up their time and make them play host is not as interesting to them. Perhaps if it enables you to meet some people in the legal department and to add some value in terms of increasing your institutional knowledge, that value justifies the intrusion. But if you really want them to be interested in having you come to their premises, offer to do CLE on site for them and their legal team. That's 74% effective, according to the law firms surveyed in this flash benchmarking survey. One other piece of data that I just want to point out is they also asked the average percent of budget, of marketing and business development budget spent on these various activities. And what they found is that 18% of the budget goes into sponsorships, but it ranks in a fairly mediocre fashion in terms of being effective. So if you're looking for smart dollars, I would spend them on existing client visits, on prospective client visits, and on client education long before I would spend them on sponsorships or web or some of these other things that didn't rank as well. Advertising did especially poorly here. If you look at, it had 15% budget spend, but only 5% effectiveness. I think a lot of law firms are learning that advertising just doesn't have the value that it once did. So anyway, these are the 3 top most effective business development activities, and I submit this to you as evidence for the concept that when you provide value in this regard, these value-added follow-ups, you want to really be focusing on training, especially on-site CLE, or other activities that provide face time, like social industry events, et cetera. So you're going to find that a low-pressure, service-oriented mindset makes it easy for prospects to continue a dialogue with you. If you're pestering them about when are you going to engage me, that's not an easy conversation for either one of you. So you're probably going to avoid it, and then you have too few touch points. You're not getting yourself up to 14, and you're going to find that it's probably less welcome on their part too. There's only a couple of those that they'll tolerate before they just don't want to hear from you anymore. Again, demonstrate your thoughtfulness, your professionalism. It's sort of like an audition. You are auditioning for the job of their outsourced legal provider. And the way that you do that is by demonstrating what it will be like to work with them before they engage you. One strategy that tends to work pretty well is just being in the neighborhood. Hey, I'm going to be in Boston next week. I thought it would be a good idea for me to just pop by. I have a meeting around the corner from your building, even if they're in the same town as you. Just saying that you're going to be down the street from them and using that as an excuse to pop by for a quick cup of coffee will often get you a meeting that would otherwise be difficult to get. So proximity and that convenience is, a useful strategy. Oftentimes when we're working with lawyers and they say, well, I have a lot of clients in New York, but I only go to New York once every couple of years, we say to them, why don't you schedule a trip to New York, tell all of the clients that you have there, or all the prospective clients, these key relationships that you have not yet secured as clients, just tell them you're going to be in New York next month, and you'd like to plan your trip during a time when they will be able to meet with you, and give them a date range. And that way, you've got a bit of a road show queued up for yourself, and you can see them in person and have a face-to-face dialogue about what their issues are and how you might potentially be working together. Obviously, if you can show up with some sort of value add, even better. By the way, for those of you who fall within the 90%, where you hear the word no or there's some sort of rejection and that deters you from any further interaction, consider that no just means not at this moment, but I might be interested later. So don't assume that no means no forever. Or don't assume that their silence even means no. Sometimes it just means they didn't see your email or they meant to respond and they didn't get around to it. Don't take it personally, whatever you do. Don't be discouraged if they're dismissive or unresponsive. Keep adding value. What you're going to do is rack up these 14 touch points through providing value. And as a service provider, this will, I think, be a lot easier for you to follow through on than it would be to be pestering them about when are they going to engage. Most lawyers are not born salespeople. They're not even comfortable with the concept of sales. But the prospecting of a potential client really does involve that ongoing touch base. Are you ready now? Are you ready now? So rather than having your message be focused more in a sales capacity, have it be focused in a value add capacity. Hey, I was thinking about you. I thought I'd provide this out value. Or, hey, I realized that there's something that we can present to you that you would find useful, we'd like to be able to bring that to you. When can we do so? Essentially what you're doing is you're earning the right to broach the unresolved business opportunities without putting a strain on the relationship by adding value. At some point, either they're going to bring it up, oh, by the way, about that proposal, or at some point you're going to learn, you're going to realize that after having provided value a few times, you've earned the right to comfortably segue into that conversation. But you really do have to earn the right through value adds. And that's how you take a short list of clients, prospects, and referral sources, and you leverage this research on how it usually takes 14 touch points before somebody who is considering to engage you for the first time engages you. It's how you take the 4 C's of putting a referral source relationship on the short list to make sure that they're going to be valuable, and it's how you ensure that the relationships that you place your limited time in bear fruit. And that way you're not sort of applying a shotgun rule to your network, but you really have a strategic way of harnessing the full potential of your network. So hopefully these various strategies and constructs have been helpful to you. I welcome any questions at this time. Lindsay, feel free to share any that have come across the channel. But I'd like to spend our remaining few minutes here focusing on specific instances or any questions that you might have about the structures that I've shared in this program.
I will give everybody a couple of minutes to type their questions in. We haven't had any so far. And I want to thank you, David, for today's presentation on a topic that I think is obviously especially relevant to us here at the ILN. So while we're waiting, I will say, as I mentioned earlier, a recording of this session and a PDF of David's slides will be circulated in the next day. And David will also be offering 2 additional webinars, with the next one taking place on July 27th, which is on follow-up techniques that close the deal. We invite you to join us for that and future webinars with David. I'll also be circulating David's contact information if anybody would like to reach out to him directly. So if you think of any questions between now and then, the next webinar, or in the next couple of days, please feel free to reach out to him directly or send those to me. So that is it. Thanks so much, David. I really appreciate it, and we will talk to you again next month.
Very good, Lindsay. Thanks, everybody.